Do politics and religion go together? Should or can politics be mixed with religion? Does it create a better society? Is it beneficial for the citizens? There are countries out there that do have religious beliefs based on how they run the country. Is this a good thing? And what happens when a country doesn't do this? Are most of or all laws of countries based on religious ideology and practices? Today, we have Tasveera Lada and Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin, and they are here to discuss politics vs religion. Tasveera Lada from London, UK, a graduate of the Religion and Politics program from King's College London, conducted her first class research on the effects of Islamophobia in schools on adolescent identity development in Europe. She is currently a MSc candidate at the London School of Economics. Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin from Detroit, Michigan, holds a master's degree in public policy from Michigan State University, where he studied impacts of lobbying in Washington, D.C. Currently manages the Muslim Public Affairs Council Policy Leadership Institute. He has published studies regarding Arab and Muslim attitudes towards various topics. He enjoys writing blogs about topics relevant to Muslims and Arab Americans and American foreign policy. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. May the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon His holy progeny, His holy prophet and His holy progeny. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear respected guests, the viewers of Imam Hussein TV channel. And welcome to Debate Time, the show that we try our best to discuss the important topics that go through your mind, your questions, and anything that is important and that relates to your lives. Our show today under the title of Politics vs Religion, where we ask our respected guests that are going to join me into the show, do politics and religion go together? Should or can we mix politics, or politics be mixed with religion? And does it create a better society? Of course, when we come to contemplate the consequences of many experiments that mixed religion and politics in the Arabic or Islamic region in the past century, we are led to one conclusion and one conclusion only. And that is that the distortion of religion and the destroying of politics. This is because of politics' use of religion. This result is not confined to the modern era, brothers and sisters, but it's astonishingly repeated historically. So if we were to study the different eras, we would come and see that it's a universal issue, and its representation is embodied in all cultures, religions, and times. But before we engage into this dialogue or debate or discussion, let me introduce and welcome my respected guests from the United Kingdom, from London, Sister Tasveera Lada, and from Washington, D.C., my respected guest, Brother Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah to you both, and welcome to Debate Time.
Alaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam rahmatullah, and welcome. And inshallah, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you my respected guests in this show and my dear brothers and sisters, the viewers of Imam Hussein TV, are all in good health and faith. Let me start with my respected guest from Washington, Brother Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin. Am I correct in using this statement, religion vs politics, or is religion with politics?
So
Yes, go ahead.
I was saying that religion and politics definitely do go hand in hand. The way that society has evolved over the centuries and even the past decades, over different societies that have ruled over different populations, religion has always influenced politics, and politics has always been influenced by religion, whether directly or indirectly.
Centum. So, am I right in saying that Islamically we have many narrations and many traditions that come and outline politics by saying that Islam is politics and politics is Islam? Am I correct in saying that?
I would say that that's definitely correct.
All right. And so when we come and say or describe politics, ever since politics was made known to human beings, is it something to do with improving people's lives, activities aimed to improving the people's or societies or communities' lives, or is it something that will increase power within a group of people, within an organization, within a community or a society?
I mean, so politics is the process to rule over society, to improve the population's lives. It has been used as a tool to increase the power for a certain segment of the population or certain members. However, the real reason, the reason why politics exists is for society to govern over itself, or rather to be governed, to have law and order, basically.
But sometimes when we look at the history and go back in history books, we find in most occasions these individuals who place themselves in these positions, in these hierarchical positions of being leaders or rulers or in charge of running the affairs of a clan or a tribe or a community or a society or a whole nation, these individuals, they will use their life system, their religion, their faith, their way of life, their way of thinking to govern these people, and on many occasions they do go astray. They only conclude their power to accommodate their wants, their needs, their interests. Why do we see in many occasions this is the case, that these people, they want to feed their own needs and desires rather than accommodating to people's needs and requirements?
So I guess it's the nature of the game of politics, of the type of individuals that it attracts. I mean, if you look at other professions, like for example, in the medical field here in the United States, it's a very lucrative career with high-paying salaries. Some people go into medicine to help people, to help humanity, to serve those that are sick, while others go into medicine looking at the paycheck, the return on investment only, and the livelihood. So same with politics. Some people, their intention is to go in and to help society, and their intention is not to chase power and wealth, while others, they see this as a tool for them to be powerful and to be wealthy and to use whatever power and wealth they accumulate from politics to meet their own needs. So it's the nature of a type of the characteristics of some people that politics does attract.
Okay, now if I can invite Sister Tasvira Lada to this conversation. Sister, you heard the brother Muhammad Baqir from Washington, as you both come from the different backgrounds, but you are, in the academic field, you're engaged in politics. The brother Muhammad Baqir says that there are different individuals with different aims. Once they enter politics, some enter it because they do really want to change the lives of people to the best, to the better, but there are those who and their intention is to accumulate wealth and power. Nowadays, when we come and see the politics and politicians around us, to what extent do you think this is true? Is it mainly people who want to really honestly, within their instincts, they want to help people to make their lives better? Or as we see, there are people who come into the job with small figures in their bank accounts, but once they leave with six-figure digits or more?
I think that's an excellent question. Just to begin, I think there's different stages of politics, right? Not everyone who goes into politics is going to be president or be making those six figures. So it's really important to note that what type of politics that person is engaging with is critical in understanding their motivations. Secondly, I think that that change is actually due to that whatever exposure a politician might have within their career. So say if you're living in a certain region of the world where you're not on social media, you're not engaging with supporters, you're actually just looking at it from a legislative perspective. That could be, for example, in state government. In those instances, I think those people might not be going towards or looking for power. They might be actually looking to make meaningful change. Whereas very outward facing positions, be it in higher legislation or in federal governments, those people have to have a certain tolerance for public presence, and therefore, in my opinion, would be more likely to be looking for a role that gains approval from the public and potentially that financial reward.
Okay, now you mentioned legislations and laws that govern these individuals, and there is a statement that says that these laws and legislations are based on religious beliefs and ideologies. To what extent do you agree to this? Whether it's these religious beliefs is from a specific religious text or religious book, or it's a conclusion of a religion, ideas taken from different religions, and it's made up into laws and legislations. Because the statement says that without religion, these political entities or these countries will not have their laws, and if they didn't have these laws, then they wouldn't have been able to govern their societies or their nations.
Yeah, I mean, looking through history, religion has played a massive role in developing the international legal system. However, today there are numerous countries that do come up with legislation and law without taking into account religion. And that could be, for example, France is the first one that everyone thinks of. And that's because they're seeking a secular perspective. Whether or not they achieve that is a separate conversation. But that aim of secular law does exist in numerous countries. However, if you want to trace that root of law, I do think religion has played a massive role in shaping how we look at the legal system.
So, Brother Muhammad Baqir, you heard Sister Tasvira saying that the religions or these legislations, they come and they introduce something that the governments, she mentioned the name of a political entity or a country, that they rely on these laws and legislations, but then they are led to becoming secular. Now, who's responsible to outline or place borders for these lawmakers or these politicians if they were to go astray and cause havoc to people's lives?
I was saying that it's the duty of the populations to ensure that their governments do not go astray. If they have the capability to keep their governments in check, it's. I mean, I'm going to speak from an American perspective. The government represents the people, right? So if the government does go astray, it's the people it's the duties on them to keep their government in check. In other parts of the world, that may not be possible, and even in the United States, it's limited. But it is definitely when your government goes vogue, it's your responsibility to make sure that those who represent you and who lead you do so in a manner that you are comfortable with.
It's very interesting for you to say is the responsibility of people, where we look on the global map today, and every nation that has tried, at least in the Middle East and in that part of the world, every nation that has come out and spoken out against that political entity or that party or that organization that has led the government and led the country and the nation to such an extreme level of inhuman activity and poverty. We see that these political organizations, these political entities, the first thing and the only thing that they know is to make this nation silent with force, with use of live ammunition, as we see every now and then. The news agencies and the social media does show us images. I mean, it's okay if we speak about the Western society, about the UK, about America, about Australia, about Europe. Again, naming these countries or these parts of the world, not all the time they allow their nation and their people to come out, because sometimes the government believes that the nation is right, and sometimes the nation believes the government is right. But not all the time they actually think of each other in the same manner. So when we come and see, for example, these Middle Eastern countries, these Arabic countries, how they react towards their nations, who is wrong? Is it the government or is it the nation? Brother Muhammad Bakr.
So that's a tough one right there, because you're going to pass judgment on a population that I have not lived within them. But on your
news,
point,
brother, we
yeah,
all see the news. We all saw what happened
the government go wrong. Like when you use force to, my own personal opinion, when you use force to silence populations, that's not correct. Doesn't matter what the reasoning is behind it. There is always peaceful ways to keep populations in check. One issue that we have right now is we watch the old movies. Back in the day, if you're going to overthrow a government or you're going to fight with your government, everybody picks up their swords and they go to the battlefield and they clash in the middle, and whoever survives wins. And usually the populations outnumber the government by a lot. The problem that we have today is that a lot of the populations, they're not fighting, sword with swords. They're fighting guns against airplanes and drones and bombs, and a lot of these governments are backed up by Western governments that give them tremendously an advantage with weaponry, and that's why these populations today, they cannot take on government, which is an issue that we have right now. You cannot overthrow a government without the support of another more powerful government, so you can have better weaponry. But definitely that is a problem that we have around the world, where populations speak out against the atrocities of their government, and they go to the streets, but then these governments, they wipe the floors with them. They cannot take them on. It's a very different reality today than it was 100 years ago and 20 years ago and older.
Okay, let me invite Sister Tasvira to this, where I say maybe it's the other countries and other entities, foreign policies, and it's the intervention of these other countries that lead a nation to rise against that government or that political entity, because their time has come to an end. It's not because the nation or the country or the society they want to overthrow, but it's these different organizations. They have their agents infiltrate into these communities and societies to an extent that because they don't agree to them being in control of power, they want to overthrow them. Do you not agree that foreign policy, or at least the Western foreign policy, is playing into the hands of dirty politics, and engaging into dirty politics in regards with some of these very weak governments.
Yeah, and I think this is going to the root of all political issues, is that wealthier countries will utilize poorer countries or people that they are, responsible towards, and manipulate them for political gain. And we've seen that throughout history. With that said, that doesn't absolve poorer nations, or be it Middle Eastern nations, be it any other authoritarian country that acts out against its citizens, of responsibility for their actions. So just because a country has acted out toward their citizens due to foreign influence, that country that acted out is still responsible for their actions. And so defining that is really important. So when we see, I think what we were previously talking about was human rights abuses in the Middle East, for example. That although other foreign policy has contributed, we have to continue to hold those countries responsible, because the governments are strong enough to answer for their actions.
Yeah, basically, these governments are waiting for orders from other entities outside the region. If we are able to take a break, and inshallah we'll come back after the break to discuss the important issue of these political entities failing, and I say it, failing dramatically in providing the well-being lifestyle for their citizens and their nations. Stay with us, and we'll come back and be with you as soon as possible. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear respected guests, and welcome to Debate Time, the show that we try our best with the help of our respected guests to answer the important questions that go through your mind. Today's topic, as you know, is politics with religion. And the first quarter of the show, we discussed what politics was and how these politicians and those individuals, when they come to take a position where they lead a community or a society or a nation, where they get their legislations and their laws from. And we emphasized about the importance of the religion being the point where these legislations are made, to keep these politicians in order and within limits, that they don't go astray and cause havoc and problems for their nations. And let me welcome back my respected guests from London, Sister Tasvira Lada, and from Washington, my respected brother Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin. Brother Muhammad Baqir, as you hold a master's in public policy from the University of Michigan State, and you studied the impacts of lobbying in Washington. Being in Washington, let me ask you about the political climate there in Washington, where you currently manage the Muslim Public Affairs Council Policy Leadership Institute. How is it politically in terms of the climate in Washington, where we every now and then hear that Washington has said this, or Washington has ordered this, or Washington has developed this relationship with this government in the Middle East? To what extent does Washington, as an example, of course, play a role in the area, in the Middle East?
I mean, Washington, D.C. gets what it wants out of the Middle East. It has for the past decades, if not longer. They have enough allied nations there where they dictate to many of these dictators and governments that we want you to do X and X happens, or we want you to do Y and Y happens. And many of these nations, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Emirat, they spend millions and millions of dollars in Washington D.C. to keep those relationships afloat and to make sure that the media and the politicians all fall within rank when it comes to making sure that these governments are represented in a way that the American population sees them as their their allies and they're good people. Because at the end of the day, the American citizens. I mean, I've traveled all over the United States. I've north, south, east, and west, and I've lived in many different states and big cities and small cities. Americans are good people. I have never met an American that has not been a nice person or polite or someone that I can see that lives with morals. And so it's important for them that their governments that represent them as well, that they take stances, at least for the majority, where they see them as they're being just, and that's far from the reality. That's where all the lobbying comes in. So yeah, Washington D.C. definitely has a big hand in the Middle East. It's had it for decades, and most likely it's there to stay for at least for the next while.
But one may ask that why do foreign lawmakers and foreign politicians and foreign legislators in other countries, they come and manipulate the state of my government, the state of my country. I mean, I am a Muslim. I follow Islam as a religion, and I live under the rule of a government that follows Islam and follows the Quran and follows the legislations that was revealed in the Holy Quran and revealed by the Holy Prophet of Islam as the central law and legislation for the government that I live under. Now, when I, as a Muslim, when I, as a religious figure living in any part of the world, see that someone who is not Muslim, someone who does not follow the Prophet of Islam, someone who does not take Islam as a book of legislations, comes and manipulates and changes my life and orders the governments that I respect and I follow to commit certain acts that will be against what I want to live accordingly to. Why do I have to stay silent? Why do I have to bear the failure upon failure of my government and not be able to say anything because that Western entity, that Western lawmaker or legislator sees it fit for its own interests, Sister Tasveer Alada?
I think that this question is very complicated because we're not in a position living in a Western nation to impose our legal views upon that Western nation. Now, if you were to live in a Muslim country, then yes, you can say, well, this is not, this is a country where Islamic law is supposed to be practiced and it's not being practiced appropriately. However, those countries have their own drawbacks. So I think the problem
I was meaning that we as Muslims come and import our laws and legislations on these Western societies because we live in these Western parts of the world. No, but I was saying that for a Muslim that lives in a Western country, in a Western society, he wants to live according to the Holy Quran. He wants to live according to the laws of the Holy Prophet of Islam. He wants to live according to the laws of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, the one that was the most successful Islamic leader in the history of mankind. But the Western cultures, the Western legislators, the Western lawmakers, they don't give a chance for that Islamic nation to take a sigh of breath and to follow the laws of Ali ibn Abi Talib and the laws of government and governance.
I mean, I think it comes down to an individual decision to be practiced for those Muslim countries and for those living in the West. So, if you live in the West, you have the option to practice with your religious freedoms in the United States, for example, or the United Kingdom. And if you are a Muslim country, to make those choices to ally with countries like the United States and Israel or Canada are decisions that those countries have made potentially out of greed, I think, for corporate profits or for the benefits of those relationships. I think it's a very complex geopolitical matter that is dependent on what region you're looking at.
At what cost, Brother Muhammad Baqir? I mean, I see that you want to comment on what the sister was saying, but at cost does that come? At the cost that the people living under those corrupt rules and leaders have to sacrifice their lives and the lives of their families and children and their livelihood, their homes and their businesses and their work, just because someone else thousands of miles and kilometers away said something has to be done in a certain manner?
I mean, that's definitely, it's definitely unjust. It's definitely unethical for what the West is doing inside the Middle East. And like speaking as an Iraqi and speaking as what our parents went through and what many of our friends' parents went through, populations speak out. Iraqis went to the streets in 1991. Every single province in Iraq collapsed, other than Baghdad. And it's not just the Muslims that went out. It was the Muslims and the Chaldeans, the Arabs and the Kurds, and everybody wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who was backed by the United States. And the only reason why they were able to get control of every single province other than Baghdad was because Washington D.C. had instilled a no-fly zone over Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was not able to fly over the provinces and take care of the populations that were standing out against him. What ended up happening was that Herbert Walker
a very
Bush,
beautiful example. Yeah. If that fly zone had not been stopped and corrupted, if the helicopters were able to fly, how would the situation be different today in regards with the political system in Iraq?
So for one, Saddam Hussein would not have been in power for another 15 years. Number two, 2003 would have not have happened. ISIS would have never came. The population itself would have overthrown its government organically, and they would have built a system within themselves. And they know how to live, and they know how to govern themselves. And therefore, hundreds and thousands of years, Muslims, Shias and Sunnis, Arab and Kurds, they would have been able to live in peace and be a prosperous nation and live to the identity and to the history of Iraq that existed before Western intervention.
Unfortunately, we would have not experienced the death and the demise of the thousands and the thousands and the hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians if that fly zone.
Following 1991, the sanctions came for about 12 years. And I remember looking at a statistic that every 45 seconds, a child in Iraq was dying from a disease like the common flu. Like all of that would have been avoided if not for George H.W. Bush deciding that Saddam Hussein in power is better for America than the population ruling over themselves. And that was the only deciding factor.
Am I right to say that because Islam is Islam, and because the legislations that the Holy Prophet of Islam introduced in his government, and because of the laws that his vicegerent and his cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib implemented at the time of his policy and times of his governance, it's because the Western entities are showing such animosity against the Muslims in these Islamic countries, Sister Tasvira?
I don't know if it's a direct correlation or causation or what that direct relationship might look like. However, I do think that the animosity has existed for extended periods of time, and from that period that you refer to on till today.
What I am trying to link here is the fact that for thousands of years, prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ones that were sent for the leading responsibility of mankind, leading them to the right path. And the right path is showing them that the fact that you follow us, the prophets of Allah, the messengers, will grant you a prosperous life, a safe life, a life where your needs, your requirements, your freedoms are going to be saved and secured. No one is going to come and take away your rights. Am I right in saying that ever since the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib in Kufa until today, or if I say until the awaited savior Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam comes back, in this portion of time in history, all the other governments and political entities that came to power have drastically failed their nations, Brother Muhammad Baqir?
I mean, that's what part of our belief as Jafari 12 or Shia is that justice will come with the awaited one. Saying that not everybody is the Shia Muslim. There is a lot of different people around the world that do live in just societies. As far as going as they don't commit injustices against their neighbors.
What is the percentage that those individuals live in just societies?
Honestly, that's I wouldn't know that. That's not what I have studied or looked into. But we do live.
My respected guests, and this
Yeah.
question is to both of you, as individuals who studied politics or engaged in politics and follow politics on a daily basis, for the benefits of the brothers and sisters that are looking for answers to some of the questions that go through their heads. Knowing that there is no one wholeheartedly would come out and say with strong belief that there is a speck of a centimeter or a millimeter on any part of the world today that the nation or the government or the society or that politician is able to come out and say that I as a politician or I as an individual member of a political entity can come out and wholeheartedly say we have 100% security, we have 100% freedom, we have 100% justice. Is there an individual that you would be able to point to that is able to say that we have such a law? Brother Muhammad Baqir first.
I don't think that, are we talking on a local level or national or global level?
On
because
a global
globally
level.
that's never existed. Yeah, globally we have never, there has always been, ever since Adam came on and the Prophet Adam alayhi salam came onto this planet and his two sons started fighting, there has always been conflict. There has been pockets of areas where people live in peace, but there's always conflict. There's always those that are trying to usurp the rights and the resources of others for their own benefit. So I don't think any person can say that during my time as leader, the world lived in 100% justice. It's too absolute.
So, Sister Tasvira, when we come to analyze what Brother Muhammad Baqir is saying, that there is no leader or there is no politician that is bravely is able to come out and say that under my rule or under my time or with the time that I was responsible to lead the government, I was able to implement law and justice in the full capacity. Now that is a very big statement. So what was the reason for your failure then? What was the reason holding you behind? What was the reason that kept on stopping you from being able to serve to the best of your ability and to bring your nation to a level of prosperity and happiness?
I think that it doesn't come down to an individual person. I think that we individually can contribute to the betterment of society. However, to expect that collective shift to absolute justice is very hard to
But I,
fathom.
as a society, sister, I, as a society, I want to be able to better my life. I want to be able to make my life and the life of my family and the society around me better day by day, hour by hour. But it is these laws and legislation, it is these lawmakers and legislators that are in powerful positions. They are committing themselves to something that they themselves are not able to implement.
Yeah, I think that, it also comes down to if an individual is looking to live absolutely every hour and every day to improve life for them and their families, then that's an individual responsibility. And by acting, I think, as a practicing Muslim and living your life with the simple good values that we talk about in the Quran or in our literature, that alone sets an example for government, for others. And then you have that civic engagement that each person can go through. Each person can get involved with local government, can get involved with federal government. However, to expect complete or absolute justice, I think, is an unreasonable expectation on an individual level.
Okay. Okay. Brothers and sisters, again, we come to a point where we have to take a break. And inshallah, after the break, when we come back, we will discuss very important aspects of the leadership and the advantages or disadvantages of some of the leaders that lead over us today. Stay with us and we'll come back. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear respected guests, and welcome back to the last segment of debate time. Sister Tasvira Lada, being a graduate of the Religion and Politics program at King's College London. Now, how important is it for a leader to practice his religion and his beliefs when he is leading?
I think that comes down to the question of if their religious beliefs are agreeable. I mean, if you're looking at, a Muslim leader, I think then we have a responsibility from our own faith to constantly be practicing. I mean, that is what our faith dictates to us. However, if we look at global leaders today, I think that situation is a bit different where, in certain religions, maybe Sikhism, or certain sects of Hinduism, that's not as important on a daily level. I mean, for the sake of this argument, I think it is essential for Muslims to really take their faith into their careers. However,
it's only about Muslims, sister, because wherever you go and put your finger on the map, on the global map today, you would find that the leader of that government or that political entity must follow a way of life, must have a religion, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Islam within all its sects, the Shia, Ja'fari sect, the so-called Sunni sect, all government leaders, all politicians, as we agreed in the first segment of the show, they go back to their faith and religion and their way of life to be able to play their part in politics.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from. However, I do think that each person has a very different relationship with faith. So, today we see a lot of leaders choose not to actually even publicize what religion there are. I mean, you can look at parts of Africa or parts of Asia that have completely not, said I'm X, Y, and Z religion. Whether or not I deem that or I judge that as important is unique, because as a Muslim, I find religion important. So that's my personal values. However, I don't think there's an academic argument to support whether or not religion, a governor's personal religion or religious association should be a part of their leadership.
So should we take religion out of the equation?
I don't think you can take it out of the equation. I mean, that would be arguing for a complete secular state with a complete separation of church and state, which has proven not to work in situations like France. It actually leads to more religious discrimination. However, if countries choose to have what the United States has, which is a certain level of separation of church and state, you know, it might work. It depends on what the nature of that state is and the size and their political, associations thus far.
Okay. Brother Muhammad Baqir, now the sister has explained that it's either a totally secular state, or in some cases, as we see today, it's a totally religious state. And I don't want to name those states and those governments, but sometimes they come out with certain rules and laws that are really harsh, that are really downgrading humanity when they implement those laws and legislations against whoever that comes out and stands wanting to express their opinion about how this government is leading. Now you see, why don't we come to an agreement that we take religion to be only implemented in mosques and religious institutes, and leave and let politicians govern and rule not in the name of the religion. They get help, they are supported by the religion and the religious scholars, but once they lead or once they take that position, they don't represent the religion, they only represent their political party and themselves.
I don't think it's necessarily true. Whether a politician says that they represent their faith or not, or even says what their faith is, what their own personal beliefs are, the way that the world will see them is as a representation of that faith. Like no matter what I do, whether I am an outspoken Muslim or not, or outspoken Shia or not, or outspoken American, Iraqi or not, when I take a stance, people will say that Baqir did X because he's Muslim, or this is what Muslims believe because Baqir said Y, right? So that's not necessarily true. There definitely is.
Isn't it a fact that in certain countries the head of the state or the head of the government or the leader of that political entity, with his appearance, with his figure, is saying that I, as a figure of this political entity, am the leader, and what I say goes?
I did not understand your question, Sayyidina, if you can repeat it.
For example, if I, in my attire and in my figure, in my appearance, become the leader of a government, how would that affect my laws and the legislations that I come and place for people to follow?
I mean, it also depends on the type of government that's in place. I mean, if you look at Iran, which is a Shia-led nation that claims to be a Shia government that's led by the fuqaha, then you ruling there would be part of the fuqaha ruling. But then if you look at Canada, for example, and they have the one Sikh that's the current foreign minister or leader of the NDP, he comes on with his Sikh turban, right? He's just representing the pluralism of Canada. So it also depends on the type of government that's in place, and what society wants and permits to step up into the positions of power.
So what happened if that religious figure or that leader who is showing his attire and his appearance entails that he is a religious figure, and how he's going to rule is going to be derived from the religious legislations? If he fails, if he makes wrong decisions, if he does something that is against the welfare of his own nation and his own people, Is it not that the whole of the religion is going to be under question here?
Absolutely, and that's, I think, one of the problem why we have right now a shift of populations going away from religion and trying to go towards secular government is because historically of the crimes that the churches and the mosques have done against their population, where they've used religion to control the population, to manipulate the politics, to collect money, and to live in wealth. And so absolutely, if a person does go up in religious attire or speaks directly on behalf of the church or the mosque, their shortcomings will be seen by the lay person as a shortcoming of that religion that they're representing.
Okay, so I think it's best to separate between separate religion from politics, because whoever that comes, either they are too secular and they will control the population in a manner that is going to be damaging if that population has religious individuals, or if that religious person comes and rules according to his religion and he fails, then that also will undermine the whole religion and bring the whole religion under the question. Sister Tasvira Lada, you as a youth growing up in the Western society but studying politics, if you was able to send a message to the politicians in the Middle East, what would you say to them?
I think it would just be to act with integrity and value the opinions of their citizens. And I think that would encompass everything I have to say, just because,
But what if those the opinions of the citizens contradict their interests?
I think at the moment, the values of the citizens or the opinions of the citizens would contradict politicians' interests, but they still deserve to be heard, because we are leaning towards a more democratic geopolitical situation around the world, and I think that would really be the most just way to govern.
Brother Muhammad Baqir, coming to the last moments of the last segment of the show, I mean, seeing the difficult situation of these nations living under the line of poverty, with a lack of electricity, with a lack of clean water, with a lack of safety and security. The infrastructure in their countries are devastatingly horrific. They don't have a life. They don't have a country. They don't have a habitat. What can we do as young leaders of the future, as young individuals who are involved in politics and studying politics? What can we do to change that scenario, not forgetting that we are individuals who take religion very seriously?
I mean, here in the West, in the United States, what I personally do is I share my view and I share my perspective with whoever I see here, whoever permits me to share my perspective with them, whether they are Christian, white, black, Muslim or not. I let them know what our government, the United States government, is doing in Iraq, what it's doing in Saudi and Qatar, supporting these nations, attacking other nations. I let them know the realities of their sons and daughters who go overseas to fight, what they're fighting for, and people they listen, right? It takes only a few times for them to hear something and to start Googling, where they'll come to the truth, and eventually that will lead to them not supporting their government, not supporting candidate X or Y because they support these dictators overseas. So from as youth in the West over here, this is what we do, and we've seen this shift happen with Palestine. Like in my own lifetime, I've seen how my organization, when they started working in Washington D.C. in the 80s and in the 90s, if they were to meet with a congressperson, AIPAC would cancel that meeting because AIPAC is anti-Semitic for being anti-Zionist, right? Where now we have Palestinians in Congress. We have Congress members that are white and black that are supporting non-Muslims and non-Middle Easterns that are supporting legislation, introducing legislation for Palestinian rights. Media would never portray Palestinians in a positive light, and now we see differently. We saw the pictures of all the kids that died in this last attack on the front page of the New York Times. So grassroots and talking to those that live around you and sharing your perspective, letting them know what you see as the truth, eventually does make a difference. And it's like the snowball effect. It starts small and eventually it keeps accumulating bigger and bigger and bigger until it's a boulder that cannot be stopped.
Centrum. Now, finally, my question to you both, and let's start with Sister Tasvira, and for the final time on the show, why don't we take the example of the government of Imam Ali alayhi salam to be the best example, and for studies to be for researches and studies to be made in accordance with the government and the governance of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and how he was able to govern not only the Muslims but the Christians and the other faiths and other religions under one banner, because his governance was so successful that he did not have a single poor person living under his rule. He did not have a single person, regardless of their faith or religion, regardless of where they were living, whether it was in the capital of his governance or in the furthest point of his rule, that they had their rights taken away from them. Why don't we try to introduce the governance of Ali ibn Abi Talib to the whole world in a more academic style and manner?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Firstly, it is being researched. Actually, Oxford University has conducted numerous studies on the political systems that existed during the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam. However, I think a lot of that research is coming to the conclusion that that geopolitical context that existed at the time of Imam Ali does not exist today. And it would take quite dynamic leaders and dynamic change to occur to recreate that, in my opinion. So I do think that it has for sure been taken as an example, and that's why it has been researched, actually. Whether or not we can recreate that is a separate conversation.
Do you agree with that? We can't take that as an example and implement the governance of Ali ibn Abi Talib in our
No, we can. No, I'm not saying we can't. I'm saying that it depends on context.
So why don't we make that contest, Brother Muhammad Baqir?
I mean, we can absolutely make the context if we take the principles of the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib and apply them to our government here. Whether it's if I'm advocating to make sure that we have a social welfare level that will make sure that the poorest of people living where I live here in the United States are able to eat. When I'm advocating for this, someone can ask me, why do you take this issue very seriously? Then I can let them know that I'm taking my lessons from the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the same can go with all the other principles and examples that he left behind from us from his government during his time in Kufa.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much. At the end of the show, I would like to thank both of my guests, Sister Tasvira Lada from London and my respected brother Muhammad Baqir Muhyiddin from Washington, for being a part of this show. And I hope that we were able to raise some of the questions and some of the concerns of our young viewers, our youth, our brothers and sisters who are questioning the political situation and the political climate that they are living in. And inshallah, we will come back and try to discuss more areas to do with politics and politicians. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you to my guests. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you and your families, and that you are kept safe and secure at all times. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.